welcome back. Today's part 2 of the Merlin house series, and I'm going to go back to kind of how I used to do my videos, which was just more live than scripted. I'm still going to try to do some scripted things, but I feel like in an instance where it's coming from like my personal perspective, it's better coming from me authentically than it is me trying to write it out. The first time that I did a video on the Merlin series, I was really nervous about it because so many weird things happened in that house, and I've always been very afraid to talk about it. And I've always been paranoid that as I talk about it, things will start to happen again. And I've definitely noticed as I've started to talk about the paranormal just in general, I've been more in tune with it again, and it's something that I realize that I have repressed for a really long time, that I am sensitive to something. And the odd thing for me is that I am very scientifically based, but this is something that I feel like science can't really touch. I don't feel like there is definite proof that there isn't something like ghosts or demons or something, but I do know that there are scientific studies that have been done that have kind of almost disproven the ability for ghosts to exist. With that in mind, gravity is also still a theory, so I think that being closed-minded is difficult to do, especially given the things that I have experienced. Where I left off last time, I was starting to tell you about just kind of the base things that started to happen to me. The first thing that happened to me was the Christmas tree shaking, and then definitely hearing footsteps and other weird things. But the scariest thing I think that ever happened to me was maybe like a year or two into living at the house, and my timeline's very skewed with this because I feel like the whole time that I lived there, things happened all the time. So I feel like no matter if it was a year in or if it was 3 years in, something scary was happening all the time there. So I don't have like a clear timeline, but I do remember when I started to actually see things versus just hear or experience things. And I feel like the first thing that happened was I had this old TV that had been my mom's, and it was one of the ones with the knob still on it that you had to get up and like twist the channels and turn up the volume. And I had it in my room, and it had an antenna, and I used to, on Friday nights, I still remember this, TGIF on ABC was the best because Sabrina the Teenage Witch was on there, and that was my favorite show. And I remember I would stay up kind of late watching it, and then I would, eventually turn the TV off. And I was always afraid to fall asleep or to turn off the light, so I would oftentimes lay there with my lamp on because I was just in general kind of afraid of the dark. But I remember I was laying there one night and the TV was off, and I remember I could see in the TV, because it was up on a dresser, you could see the reflection of most of my room. And so you could see my bed, and you could see my dresser next to me, my nightstand, and then you could see like over on the left I had this giant stuffed Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer that was seriously like, it would take up like this entire background. It was so big. I used it like a couch all the way up until like high school, and I actually even had it until about 5 years ago. But you could see all this stuff, and I remember I could see in the reflection something had come from like towards the Rudolph and like in front of my bed, and I couldn't see it like in front of me, but I could see it in the reflection of the TV, and it looked like it was low to the ground. And I remember just being terrified that like now I felt like I couldn't even get out of bed to run downstairs, and I felt like I was trapped. And I remember I started to sleep with my legs crisscross, so like I was sitting crisscross applesauce but laying down, and I started to sleep like that because I was terrified that something was going to reach up and grab over from the bottom of the bed or something. And this started to happen a lot. Like, it got to the point where I remember I would throw like a blanket over the TV just so I didn't have to see anything, but then that started to freak me out in itself too, that I couldn't see it. So one of the most rapid times that I remember is that over so if this was like my bed and I'm laying down, my feet are like this way. Over here there was a side table that I had like my little touch lamp on and my alarm clock, and it had 2 little drawers in it. And I remember I heard like something shuffle the drawer almost, and it was like this old, you know how the old dressers were made out of like plywood, the ones in the 90s that they made for kids, and so you could definitely hear like the wood scraping if you opened it, is what I'm saying. It wasn't on rollers. And so like I heard the drawer just very, very slightly, like somebody just kind of like grabbed it and pulled it and then stopped. And I remember I looked into the TV right away because I was just like, I didn't know what it was. And you could see in the TV, it looked like something like crouched down next to the dresser, and then it just rapidly, like I remember it left from over here in the TV, and it like went around the front of my bed, and like it looked like it just either disappeared or went under my bed, and like it gives me chills right now just thinking about it. And I don't know what that was, and that was something that had not occurred before, and it didn't really happen all the time, but I definitely, you could see it, and I was terrified to look on my own, because you have to remember I was probably like 6, 7, maybe at the most 8. I was just terrified to look over the edge of the bed to see if I could actually see something, because if I actually saw something, like I don't even know how I would process that. And the scariest thing that I think happened in that house overall was just the feeling that you got walking in there, and the feeling of like you're not wanted there, and like you want to run, but it was hard because it was home too, and so you're at war, like you want to go home, but you feel like you don't have home because you're terrified to be there. And it was terrifying as a kid to feel like I didn't have a home to go to sometimes, because home was scary and I couldn't wait to get out of it sometimes. And it was so frustrating because I couldn't get that across. I still can't get it across to my family, except for my sister, on how freaking terrifying it was there. And like I meant to film this like weeks ago, 2 weeks ago or so, and I haven't been able to because I've been having nightmares again about the house, and I could feel like, it's such a weird thing to explain, but like I could feel the feeling of that house around me all the time, and it was like, I don't know if whatever it was that was there was with me, and that's what I was feeling, and I'm just not as sensitive to it anymore because I've tried really hard to keep all that away. But like I could feel it. And there was a couple nights ago that I had gone over here. There's like a hallway, and then it goes this way, and it goes to my daughter's room at the end. And I had gone down the hallway, I turned left, and I could just feel that same feeling that I got when I would go to my room. And I was just like, at first I was like, you know, it's in my head, like nothing's gonna happen. And I opened the door, and like the feeling, the energy that hit me, like it literally knocked me back. And I remember I was just like, whoa, and like I just walked away, like I couldn't go back. And I don't know what it was, and so I had to stop with the whole idea of filming this up until now, because it was just too much mentally and like almost physically to deal with the stress of remembering all that. And it's hard to put into words because it's like a feeling that you can't describe. It's not that you're terrified, it's not that you're afraid of something, and it's not even fight or flight response. It's very like, it's almost like you're just in a sense like just in this heightened point of panic. Like there's just no way to describe it really. And that was all the time for me in that house. It could be the middle of the day, and if my dad or my mom went outside to go to the garden or to let the dogs outside, I was terrified to be alone in the house during the day. The scariest thing that happened, besides just that overall feeling of terror, was one night I had gone up the stairs to my room, and I had turned right into the hallway. And again, if you went up the stairs, if this is up the stairs, if you would turn this way, it was my room, this way was my sister's room, and right in front of me was the bathroom door when you came up the stairwell. And there was probably like this I mean, and I could be exaggerating it, but I remember laying in that hallway sometimes, and like, if I had rolled towards the stairwell, I could have gone down, or I would have rolled into the bathroom. Like, it was just not very big. And so I came up there, and I stopped, and like, I always hated going up there, and either my sister wasn't home, or she wasn't home, or she was downstairs. But I remember when she wasn't living with us, her bedroom door was typically kept shut, and I think she was living with us because I remember the door being open. And I remember I got like this weird feeling, like something was coming from the left, and I remember I turned and I just acted like nothing was happening, and I went into my room, and like I could hear behind me really quick footsteps. And when I looked up, my blinds were open in my room, and it was dark outside, so you could see the reflection of everything. And I could see the figure of a man standing in my window. And what I didn't fully understand at the time, but as I realized it, as I got older and like I thought about it, is that it actually was the reflection of somebody behind me. That was so terrifying. And I remember, without question, I ran downstairs screaming. Like, that was the one time that I remember being so terrified that I ran downstairs screaming. I remember both of my parents kind of like popped up, like, what was wrong? And I remember saying, there's a man in my window, there's a man in my window. And my dad actually went outside, and he looked for footprints, and he looked for ladder marks, because they were like, well, maybe it's like a peeping Tom. And it finally was so believable that they finally were looking for physical proof, and they didn't find anything. And ever since then, I am terrified to have the blinds open during the nighttime. Like, and it's an irrational fear, because it's obviously not something that's going to happen all the time, but it's like, I don't want to see anything, so I just keep the blinds shut at night, because it scares me. And I really only got over that when I was probably like 25. And so like a couple years ago, we were living in this house. It was a house that I feel was actually haunted, but not in a scary way. It was very much like we were just co-inhabiting the space. That was again when I started to shut the blinds, because I could see something walking around, or I would see just a shadow move by and there was nothing there. And for me, it was equally terrifying to think that it could be somebody outside, but it was also terrifying to think that they could be inside and not even be alive. Like, I don't know, it was crazy. But anyway, the Merlin house, after that happened, I remember my dad and my mom both tried to just talk me down all the time, but I couldn't sleep upstairs for sure after that. And I remember they would make me try to go to bed, and I would hate it, and I would cry, and I would get really aggressive about it. And I would wait until I would stay awake, because I couldn't sleep, and I refused to sleep up there. And I remember I would sit up cross-legged in the middle of my bed with a circle of toys around me, and I was waiting for my parents to turn the TV off and the lights off downstairs. And what they used to do to try to make me feel safe is they'd leave the stairwell light on, and so I always knew when they were going to bed is when they turned it off. That's not why they left it on. They left it on, you know, thinking that I would feel safe, and they probably assumed that I was asleep. But they would literally, I would wait until I could hear their bedroom door downstairs shut, and I would immediately run downstairs and get on the couch. In our living room there, so there was the stairwell here, closest to the camera. On the wall where the stairwell was like our little office setup, and then over here was like our bigger living room. And there was a couch. Let's say this is the outside wall here. It was up against the wall facing the stairwell. That was the couch that I always slept on, and it faced the fish tank that we had in the living room for a while. And I had a goldfish, and I can remember it was comforting in a way to watch the fish tank, because you could see the light of the heater kick on and off, and it was just like that steady red glow, and I could see the fish swimming in there through the light, you know, and it was just a much calmer place to be. But I remember I could hear stuff upstairs still. When I would be downstairs, I could hear something in my room, and I remember, you know, sometimes my parents would say it's squirrels on the roof, they're coming off of the oak tree, or walnut tree rather. they would say it could just be a raccoon, or, any number of things that you try to say to calm your kid down to make sure that they don't think their room's haunted, but like none of it was working. I remember one night there was all this commotion up there, and my sister was not home at this point. I think she was like at a friend's house or something, and there was all this commotion upstairs. And I remember I could hear somebody coming down the stairs, and I thought I was like, oh, like my sister must be home, and I just don't, I don't know, maybe I didn't know that she was home. And you could hear somebody coming down the stairs, and on the stairwell, it was, you couldn't see somebody coming down until they got like a little bit further, because there was like a wall. I remember all of a sudden, like, you could see somebody just lean and then go back, and they went back up the stairs, and it was not my sister, and it wasn't really anybody, it was just a shadow. It was terrifying. And I remember from then on, even though I was scared to have my back to whatever it was, I slept with my back to the stairwell, and I just buried my face in the back of the couch, because I couldn't handle it. And this happened from the time that I was like a young primary school kid, when I was like kindergarten, first grade, until I was in, I think, third grade, where I should have had rational thought, right? And I should have started to kind of outgrow it, but it actually got worse as I got older, because I started to understand more about what it was potentially, what it really potentially was. And I remember feeling like, I don't know, I just felt so stupid, because I remember I tried to talk to one of my friends about it one time, and then she would never stay the night at my house again. But I remember trying to talk to her about it, and it was just like I was looked at like I was crazy. And even to this day, when I talk about it, I warn like my adult friends. I'm like, I'm gonna sound insane, but I've been haunted by something my whole life. And what I mean by that is that sporadically, ever since I lived in the Merlin house, I have strange things happen. And it's not just strange things that are different, because I do have strange things that have happened that are not related to the Merlin house, and I can tell. And the thing that's weird about it is that the reason I can tell is because I can feel the energy of that house, and I can feel it. It feels almost suffocating. And there was a time a few years ago, before I had my daughter, that I almost went insane, and I thought that I was seeing my dead grandma, and I thought that she was talking to me and berating me, and like I was losing it, I was pretty sure. But then I realized, when I drove 4 hours to a grave marker for her just to get it out, I realized that it wasn't actually her, and the energy that I felt was so familiar to what I had as a kid that I am at a point where I'm like, was that the thing that haunted me at the Merlin house? And it was just screwing with me. And then we lived in a townhome before we moved to Arizona, and it was a duplex. And I remember every time I went into the bathroom, I could hear our neighbor in their bathroom, and the walls were thin, but it was like it got beyond the point of being a coincidence that they were in their bathroom at the same time. And I refused to acknowledge it at the time, but now that I've thought about it, it wasn't just somebody in the bathroom, and the energy that I was feeling was again like the Merlin house. And so when I started to feel that energy again the last couple of weeks after I started talking about it, I was feeling it really strongly. And I think instead of just ignoring it, it was because I had been talking about it, and it just hit me really hard all of a sudden. It was like I was 8 or 9 years old again. And so literally to this day, I feel like whatever it was or is still in some way able to screw with me. And I don't know that it's me that's haunted. I don't know if there's something that I own that it's latched onto, and because I do have stuff that I had even in the Merlin house. I have furniture from then. And I don't know, and I'm not at a point where I'm gonna burn everything, because quite frankly, my bookshelves would be gone, and I would have to get rid of all of my childhood, heirlooms and toys, and I would have to get rid of dressers, and it's like I'm not gonna go through that big of a purge just to get rid of something that I've obviously lived with my entire life. And as frightening as it is, at the same time, I'm like, whatever, like it's been here forever, and the worst thing that happens is that I'm scared, and so I just try to ignore it. I remember when we moved out of the Merlin house, it was somewhat bittersweet because in one way I was very elated just to get away from it, but at the same time I had lived there for a while and it was home, and I had a room that I loved aside from at night when it terrified me or if I was up there alone. So I mean, material wise I loved it, but I remember I jokingly said to my family that like I was gonna tie myself to the flagpole out front because I didn't want to leave, and I had nightmares about that after that. And of course that could just be power of suggestion of my own brain, but it was just very odd that I had these nightmares of being tied up to the flagpole and stuck there. I remember when we drove away, one of the last things that I thought was, please do not let it follow me. And obviously it didn't listen, or something else followed me, or I've just been haunted by similar things. But it very much was a terrifying experience that hit me very hard for a lot of my life. And I think the most frustrating thing was trying to get people to believe me and not being believed. And afterwards, when I was very sensitive then to scary movies. I hated them. I didn't want anything to do with haunted houses. I went so far the other direction that I was terrified of everything that had to do with the paranormal. I wasn't scared to go out in the woods. The potential for, cougars and bears didn't scare me, but what terrified me was anything that was remotely creepy looking. And when I got into high school finally, like when I was like 15 and 16, I finally decided like, okay, I'm gonna get back into scary movies. I'm just gonna start exploring things and doing things the way that I want to. I did, but then it did open me up again to more things, and so I definitely do have more stories of my own personal experience with the paranormal. But what catapulted me into it was the Merlin house, and prior to that place I had never been afraid of anything, and I was always very sensitive to graveyards. I didn't want to go to them, and I could feel it would just make my stomach turn. I could feel bad energy all the time when I was there, and I could feel bad energy when we drove past this Indian burial grounds that was on the way to my grandparents' house that they had made a national landmark out of on the Oregon coast. And I had this horrible feeling. I didn't want to drive by it. I would I would have panic when we would go by it. And as I got older, I had to start pretending like none of that stuff bugged me, right? But I used to actually hold my breath going by cemeteries because I was convinced that somehow if I didn't, they were gonna get inside me. And it affected me. That house affected the way that I lived my life and reacted to things, both paranormal and normal, forever, and it still does. And so that's my very first story of journeying into the paranormal and what got me kind of interested in it as I got older and tried to understand it and realized that other people had these experiences too. So I definitely have more stories that I can tell, but that's it for the Merlin house for now. I do plan to kind of revisit it because I realize I'm a little bit scrambled and all over the place with it, but there are other things that I haven't talked about that were scary, but that is the overall thing. Until then, I will be doing a video on the Bell Witch, actually, which if you don't know that legend, definitely check it out. I'll be doing a video on that next, and I'm still doing some research on it, so it might take me a little bit, but that one I'm pretty excited about. Obviously, it's not a personal experience, but it's something that interests me. So until then, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you want to hear about next. And don't forget, don't turn out the light.